Like I said, welcome to this May Dialogues. It is the 60th edition of the Dialogue sessions. So if I do my math correctly, I think that's 5 years of Fridays that we've met with you. Many of you are very familiar on this call. We've seen your names show up a bunch, so we greatly appreciate your support of the program and surely encourage you to invite other members of your teams or in your businesses or people that you know to join us on Fridays if they can do that at all. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tong. She's going to kick us off this morning and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And it's my honor to speak at the 6th anniversary, 60th, right? So,
Yeah. Yep.
yeah. And so let me share my screen first. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen now?
Looks good.
Okay. Yeah. So my topic this morning will be grazing management for profitable ranching. And my name is Tong Wang. I'm an advanced production specialist in South Dakota State University. So think about ranching. First, we need to find out what's our goals. The goals for ranchers here, I have a pretty long list. So for example, there's increase in grassland productivity, increase in desirable grass, drought resilience, and then longer grazing season, optimize economic returns, and then affordable labor management time, and then improve wildlife habitat. So those are the long list of goals. So we need to think about how we can reach those goals. So here, I have three common grazing management strategies. So you can see there are three squares here, and they are the basically grassland. So the first one, we have continuous grazing. So you can see there's no boundaries, no limits for this cattle, and the cattle can move anywhere it wants and then graze anywhere, just within this pasture. And rotational grazing, it has some limits. Normally, we have 4 to 15 pastures. We divide the grassland into either 4 up to 15 pastures, and the livestock graze on each pasture for weeks or months before they are moving forward to the next one. And then multi-paddock grazing or management intensive grazing, it is a more intensive form of rotational grazing. So we can see here that we have more paddock numbers. So generally we have more than 16 paddocks, and the livestock stays in each paddock for a short period of time, usually 1 day or up to 14 days, and followed by a much longer recovery period. It tends to be 20 to 100 days. So with those common grazing management strategies, first we want to take a look what happens in the continuous grazing. So here is a 3D map, shows that, so you can see there are some green spots here. So the green spots just tells you where the cattle has been grazing at. So we can see that this area out of the entire area, so the cattle are grazing in some spots, definitely not uniformly. So that is because the cattle tend to graze in their favorite spots, such as close to the water, close to the shade, and they also tend to graze only the some palatable grass instead of non-palatable grass to them. So they are picky eaters. So that's why you can see a large ground that is ignored by them, because they don't like to eat grasses in those places because of various reasons. So if in some, we found that the cattle utilize less than 40% of the area and left 60% of area untouched. So this is what happened in the continuous grazing, where we have no boundary. And then take a look closely at what happens on the ground. What we can find is the cattle, actually, they have a selective grazing behavior where they select the more palatable grass and left the non-palatable grass to them untouched. So this is another pattern of their grazing behavior. So we think about, instead of continuous grazing, suppose we actually divide this grassland into multiple pastures and let the cattle graze on one of the small pastures at a time. So this is hypothetical. I just draw it hypothetically. However, if you just let them graze in a small area and with high stocking density, so the cattle basically, they will consume the grass more uniformly. So this is what happens on the ground. So we can see the cattle, because they have no choice, they actually consume a wider variety of plant species before they move to the next one. So we can see here, basically the next paddock have been resting for sufficient amount of time. So they have lots of grass. So the cattle basically happily moving to the next paddock here. So we have different, we can categorize into two functional groups of grasses, and one is the palatable grass and the other non-palatable grass. So here I give some examples. So the big blue stem India grass, they are the palatable grass for the cattle, and the silver blue stem and the meadow dropsy, they are non-palatable grass for the cattle. So the problem of the cattle eat too much of the palatable grass is if it is grazed too short. So we can see the grass growth rate is, first, the grass grows slow, and then it reaches a rapid growth rate, and then the growth rate slows down again. So if the grass is grazed too short, like some favorable grass for cattle, if it grows, grazes too short, and then the growth rate will be slow at the short, this region. So if the growth rate is slow, because we can see on the right side, there is the palatable grass basically is competing or fighting with the non-palatable grass to get more ground. So if the palatable grass is grazed too short, and then it does not have an advantage because the growth rate of the palatable grass will be slow, so the non-palatable grass will grow faster than the palatable grass. So eventually the non-palatable grass will take more ground than the palatable grass. So that's the problem of if the cattle actually focus on the palatable grass and always graze the palatable grass. So here is what we try to model what happens. We use a plant response function, and we use a livestock function. We try to see what happens if we let the cattle either graze continuously or graze in a multi-paddock way. So here is we found throughout the model. So this one, you can see there are two red lines. The red lines are the non-palatable grass, and the green lines are the palatable grass. So on this line, you can see some zigzag here. Basically, this means the cattle first graze down when it's grazing time, but in the recovery time, the grass will grow back, and then again, it's a grazing time and then recovery time. So we can see that in this multi-paddock grazing pattern, because there is a sufficient recovery time, so the palatable grass have time to regrow and so reach a faster growth rate. So we can see that this green zigzag line here, the pattern is going slightly, like steadily up a little bit. However, if you look at this green pattern here, where we have the continuous grazing, so basically is going down because the cattle graze too much of it. So this palatable grass just drops in quantity. And meanwhile, we can see that this non-palatable grass wins and it increases in amount. And in the this multi-paddock grazing, the opposite pattern happens. So we can see that definitely in the multi-paddock grazing, there is more advantage for the palatable grass. So here is what we did, is we did 2 surveys, one in 2018 and one in 2022 in the United States Great Plains, 2 states in the Northern Plains, South Dakota, North Dakota, and the other is in Southern Plains. We try to find out the ranchers' opinion on this. So here is what we found. So we found out the people who use rotational grazing or people who didn't use rotational grazing. So the green bar here means people who are using rotational grazing. And so they found there is either a medium or a significant increase in the desirable grass. So we can see that the desirable grass, so nearly 40% feel there is a medium increase, and then 45% feel like there is a significant increase for those people who uses rotational grazing. So that means both from the modeling perspective and from the survey perspective, we found the same thing, that this multi-petal grazing actually gives the advantage for this palatable or desirable grass. And another thing is we try to look at what about stocking rates. So here we look at different stocking rates, and these lines, this time is the color stands for the stocking rates. So all these lines stand for the palatable grass. So here the pink line stands for the light stocking rates, and then green line stands for the heavy stocking rates. So we can see that if we have a light stocking rates of cattle, so in this way, the cattle, even though in the continuous grazing, we see the palatable grass is fine, even though its palatable grass amount is less than under the multi-petal grazing. However, because the light stocking rate, the cattle did not graze too much about palatable grass, it still maintains a increasing trend. And then, however, if we look at heavy grazing, the pattern is different, as we point out just now, is and heavy grazing, continuous grazing, actually cause a problem. So that's because of the too much overgrazing on the palatable grass, it goes down. So basically, we can see that the palatable grass basically has a more disadvantage under heavy grazing. And then we look at the rancher's opinion on this matter. So basically, what we found is heavy grazing, even if we use multi-petal grazing, even under a high stocking rate, the palatable grass can maintain its advantage. So here is what we found. This is consistent with our figure just now. So this one shows, okay, so we divide again the ranchers into 3 groups based on the management practices they are using. So continuous grazing, they feel like their stocking rate of the cattle remained about the same over the past 10 years. And RG, their stocking rate reaches a little bit higher than about the same. And this multi-petal grazing or MIG, the average growth rate in the stocking rate is increased by 5 to 10%. So we can see that as ranchers divide their grassland into more paddocks, in that way, we can see that they can see a more higher stocking capacity for their grassland. So here we want to see what happens when it rains. How well does the grassland absorb water? So this is an NRCS rainfall simulator. So on the left, we can see this grass is well managed with a diversity of grass. And on the right, this is a poorly managed pasture that has been overgrazed. So we can see 2 bottles in behind and 2 bottles in the front. So we can see that on the well-managed grass, the bottle in the front have no water, and in the here in the back has all the water. So this means all the water are infiltrated from the grassland. No water has been run off. So however, if you look at the poorly managed grassland, it's the opposite. We can see most of the water goes to the runoff bottle, and just less than half of the water goes to the infiltration water bottle. So it's the opposite. So what makes this happen is if we look at the grassland, so we can see on the continuous grazing management, because of the overgrazing, so some of the palatable grass cannot take ground, so it dies over time, and there's some background left. And then on this rotational grazing, because of the sufficient recovery period, so we have good grass here. And here on the root side, we can see the same thing. And in the multi-petal grazing, we can see deeper and more roots because of the greater biomass density on the above the ground. However, continuous grazing, we have very shallow roots, so that caused loss of runoff and not enough infiltration. So this is again from the survey findings. Again, what we found is the same as we found from the experiment. So the farmers, they have used the rotational grazing. They actually agree that this rotational grazing or multi-petal grazing have either medium or significant benefits in decreasing the water runoff and soil erosion. And they also found that there is significant faster drought recovery. So we can see compared to non-users, some non-users might believe there's no benefits. However, among the users, very few believe there's no benefits, but most of them believe there's either medium, and nearly 50% feel there are significant benefit when there is a drought. And looking at the grazing days and the hay feeding days, we know that as a rancher, we all want to maximize the grazing days and minimize the hay feeding days. So here we see that the grazing management practices actually change the grazing days and the hay feeding days. So we can see that here, the continuous grazing, this is in South Dakota. So the grazing days is about 6 months for the continuous grazers. And then if you look at MIG, this is more than 7 months. So nearly 8 months. So nearly 2 month increase in the grazing days. And the hay feeding days have also decreased significantly accordingly, because it's more grazing means less hay feeding. So this one decreased from about 5 months, from about 5 months to 4 months. So, so we can see that there should be lots of cost saving in this regard. So then we try to ask, like what happens if we use rotational grazing or multi-petal grazing? We know it enhances forage production, improved soil health, but does it mean that there is increased economic profits? So we ask this question is because there is additional investment for multi-petal grazing. So we can see that because there are some fences and some water tanks, so those actually involves some additional costs. So for example, there could be a fence energizer and remote and the fence reel, this gate. So we try to figure out how much this cost and compare to the benefit with the cost, what is more benefit or more cost here. So here, again, this is a published paper and where we got the startup cost from different sources. We can see that different sources provide different costs. So some on the low side, if all the costs are without further labor cost. For example, if you use the existing ranch labor, so the startup cost could be as low as $3 per acre. However, if you need to hire new labor and then the cost will be higher, we can estimate at $30 per acre. And then some people actually estimate more if there is a livestock land construction. So there could be a large range of the startup costs. So, and also the cost actually is affected by the pasture area. So if there is more acres in the pasture, we can see that there is the lower cost. The cost basically is spread into more acres, so cost will be lower. However, if the pasture have very few acres, the cost on the per acre basis will be higher. So if we look at a pasture with between 600 and 700 acres, for example, the material cost will be close to $10 here. However, if we look at something less than 100 acres, the material cost could go up to as high as $7. So that depends on the pasture size as well. And this is a middle range. So if we try to use different pastures, different cost. So because we mentioned there could be a low cost and a medium cost and a high cost, we use the medium cost as our baseline, and we try to find out whether the startup cost actually give us a higher net present value in 5 years. So basically, we try to see the economic profit in 5 years, how the rotational grazing compares to the continuous grazing. So we can see that with the high cost, actually the benefit goes down. Low cost, the benefit goes up. That is obvious. However, even with the high cost case, the $70 per acre, we can see that if we have a sufficient high stocking rate, we still have higher economic benefits from the cost. So with the high cost, $70 per acre, we can see if the stocking rate is more than 30, where we 30 steers per 100 hectare, so then we have a higher profit. And then if we have 30 years instead of 5 years, then the rotational grazing always results in higher economic benefits than the continuous grazing. So depends on whether we use a short term or longer term, but most of the cases, either in the short term or longer term, we can see that basically this rotational grazing pays off. And this again is consistent with our survey result. So we asked them, the ranchers, what do you think that this multi-paddock has an effect on your ranch profitability? So people who don't use it, use either continuous grazing or rotational grazing on a low intensity basis, they feel like there might be no influence, maybe slightly increase a little bit. However, those people who actually use it, they feel like their profit have increased between 5 to 10% or more than 10%. So people who use it, they maybe have more right to have their own opinion on this. So they feel like it increased almost by more than 10%. And if we look at the scale effect, so we have the acres in pasture here because we know that there are more acres in the pasture, the cost will go down. And also the benefit will go up because if you have more acres in the pasture, then there is more problem with spot grazing and the cattle will utilize less percentage of the pasture. So the benefit actually goes up. So basically we can find a balance point or a break-even point. So where the benefit will overweigh the cost. So we can see there is a point if your ranch exceeds a certain acres, then we have more benefit than the cost. Of course, this break-even point will change, depends on our location, the rainfall, the soil. There are different factors that affects these break-even points in different locations. Okay, so that's the end of our talk, and our take-home message here is we found that compared to continuous grazing, multi-paddock grazing on large commercial ranches basically sustains a much higher stocking rate and increases ranch profit. And then the benefit will become more evident if we have a drought condition, or if the non-palatable grass become more prevalent in that ranch. So the conclusion is the adoption of MIG or multi-paddock strategy could be a win-win situation for both ranchers and the society because of its benefits to the grass, to the soil, to the environment. So it could be a win-win situation. Okay, so that's the end of my slide. Thank you, and you can find my contact information on the left bottom corner. Thank you.
Thanks, Tong. Anyone have any questions that they want to ask quick? I don't see any in the chat at this point, but you can type them in or unmute your microphones if you'd like. Otherwise, Tong's going to hang with us till the end, and we can ask some questions at that point.
Okay, so you want me to stop share?
Yeah, I would say so. Let's switch presenters, and we will go into Sarah's presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. And it's really an honor to be here today, especially since it's the 60th Ag Econ Dialogue. So I feel very happy and privileged, and very happy to be co-presenting with my colleague Tong as well. I'm going to switch topics a little bit and go towards the crop side, but I wanted to provide some updates on 2024 planting progress. I wanted to go over some of the USDA reports on this and kind of where we're at compared to previous years and where we're at compared to other states. So my name is Sarah Sellars. I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist in sustainable farm and food systems here in the Ness School of Management and Economics. So first, I want to start with planting progress and crop conditions. I don't know if I'm a very good one to talk about this because I've been slow on my planting progress at home this year with my garden and my flowers. I'm only probably about at 20%, so slow progress here in Brookings at my place, but hoping to get that to 100% after the weekend. So I want to go over the NASS Crop Progress Report. All of this information can be found at the link below. I provided the link. It's through the USDA, so they provide this report every week on the NASS Crop Progress website that has the most recent and most updated planting progress data. So I'll be using the data from May 12th, so there'll be a new one released at the beginning of next week. And these reports are released weekly during the growing season. They're provided for all these different commodities that I show below. This is kind of the schedule they provide these reports. So during the growing season, you can see kind of the schedule for some of the commodities we're particularly interested in here in South Dakota, like corn, soybeans, range and pasture, oats, and wheat. And then I also wanted to touch on the weekly weather and crop bulletin. So I'm pull a little bit of data from this, but this is another helpful tool as you're moving through the growing season and thinking about cropping outcomes and prices and how that all fits together, supply and demand. This could be an interesting tool for you. And again, I provided that link below, but they put this report out weekly, state level, and also overall outlook across the US. So all this data comes from the USDA Crop progress planting report. So first I want to talk about the corn progress here in South Dakota. On the bottom here, we have the dates. So the bar on the far left is our planting progress as of May 12th, 2023. The second vertical bar is our planting progress as of May 5th, 2024. And then the third vertical bar is the current planting progress, which is as of May 12th, 2024. And then on the far right, we have the average from 2019 to 2023. So you can see as of right now, we're at 32% of our corn in South Dakota planted, which is lower than where we were at last year at this time, and also lower than the 2019 to 2023 average. I do want to point out that we've increased our planting progress by 14% in the last week. So we jumped from 18% planted to 32% planted. So you can see that we have the capability to move pretty quickly and increase that planting progress percentage. So I don't see it as too much of a concern that we're kind of behind the average and behind the last year. So we'll see at the beginning of next week how much we've been able to get done within the last week. But I'm expecting that quick planting trend to continue. And then I just wanted to kind of look at where we are compared to other states. So the only state that is ahead of where they were last year is North Dakota. And as you can see, they've got a very small percent of their total acres planted. The green bar is this year's planting, so they're at a little over 20%. In all other states, we see kind of the same trend we see here in South Dakota, except for Kansas, but we see kind of a lag this year when we look at where we were last year and where we were on average for Nebraska and Iowa. And then Kansas, we see them ahead of where they were last year and where they were on average as well, slightly ahead. So that's the green bar. And this isn't too relevant yet because we're just getting started here. But when we think about corn emergence and where we're at, this report's going to be really important as they're updating these numbers every single week. But we're a little bit lower than where we were last year, which is as expected with slightly lower planting percentage than last year, but less than 5% emerged so far. The green bar again is this year's emergence. Only about 1% in North Dakota, so still really just getting started there. And then when we look at Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa, I just picked some of our neighboring states to see what's going on. Kansas is quite a bit ahead again in planting and emergence. And then in Nebraska, we see kind of the similar trend of they're a bit behind from last year. In Iowa, they're about the same as last year and a little bit above average when we look at the corn emergence. So still quite a bit of ways to go on this. Now let's jump over to soybeans and talk about the soybean planting progress here in South Dakota. This third bar here is as of May 12th, 2024. We're right at 17% planted. Compared to last year at the same time, we had 24% of the soybean acres planted. And as of the week before, which was May 5th, there were 10% of the soybean acres planted. And we're slightly below average, which is 22% of the soybean acres planted by May 12th. So we've increased by 7% in the last week. And again, I'm expecting that to continue as we're getting these good days for planting. The weather's hopefully more good weather in the future, and expecting that acres to keep increasing. And then here's where we're at compared to other states with the soybean planting progress. Again, the green bar is this year's planting progress. The dark blue bar on the far left is last year's planting progress. The light blue bar is our average planting progress. And the orange bar is the previous week, which was May 5th, 2024. So again, North Dakota is the only state ahead of where they were last year, but they're still really just getting started. And they're still below their average, which is the light blue bar. You can see green, which is the current planted percentage acres, and North Dakota is below average. I also want to point out Kansas. They are below planted acres that they were last year. We can see the green bar is lower than the dark blue bar, but it's higher than their average, which is the light blue bar. And then again, in Nebraska and Iowa, we see the same trend we see in South Dakota, which is that our current planting percentage is lower than both the average planting percentage over the last few years and also last year's planting percentage. And again, we're really just getting started here with soybean emergence here in the Dakotas, but we can see Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska, they have, this is going to be something to watch as they keep releasing these weekly reports, but they're above average, but below where they were at the same time last year. Next, I want to touch on the winter wheat conditions. So as the crop progresses, they not only provide the planting progress, but they also provide conditions. So they give a score of very poor, poor, fair, good, or excellent to all of the crop. I forgot to mention how all this data is collected. So they have people across the state that work with the USDA, people that are familiar with agriculture and the agricultural landscape. They go out and they check the field conditions and they report this to the USDA, and this all gets compiled into a report. All the data gets reviewed. So this data comes from boots on the ground visualizations of the crops, of the planting progress, and of the crop conditions. So as of now, in South Dakota, most of the winter wheat is rated as good, and 97% is fair, good, or excellent. So very optimistic conditions so far with winter wheat. And again, we don't have any of these conditions for our other crops yet, but as the cropping season progresses, we'll also see this data for the other crops as well. Just want to touch briefly on oats. So we're ahead on oats compared to the average and also to last year. So last year we were right about 76% at this time. And as of now, we have 84% of the oats planted in South Dakota, and we're way above the average, which was about 73% since 2019. We also have spring wheat. So as of 5/12/2024, we're almost at 90% of that planted. So again, we're above average, similar with oats. We're above average compared to the last 5 years and compared to last year as well. And they also provide an emergence report on this. I pulled the number out of there. 57% of the spring wheat has emerged as of 5/12/24. They also assigned some ratings to pasture and rangeland conditions in states where this data is important. So I just pulled a few of our neighbors for comparison as well. So again, I pulled North Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa. But the dark blue bar is our South Dakota data. So we can see most of our South Dakota pasture and rangeland as of May 12th is rated as good, 75%. That's the tall blue bar here. And that's pretty similar to a lot of our neighboring states. A lot of them are in the good category for now, but we'll see how this changes as the weather and as the season progresses for the year. And then I just wanted to touch briefly on the field conditions. This data is also provided in the USDA report that I mentioned, the crop progress report. Also, there's some of this data comes from the USDA weather report as well. So very helpful tools to watch as you're thinking about the growing season. This is the data of the days suitable for field work across the US. So they scale this based on the total crop acres in the state, but they come up with a calculation. Okay, let's look at the last week. So during that last week, how many of the days in the week were most most of the day was suitable for doing field work. So for the week ending May 12th in South Dakota, you'll see that 3.6 of the days of the week were suitable for doing field work. So we were in the green, which is pretty good compared to some other states, which are at 1 to 2 right now. And again, that's due to weather. So that's definitely something to watch as we progress into finishing up planting and heading into watching the crop conditions. And then I'm not going to get too much into weather because that's not my specialty. I know Dr. Laura Edwards, our state climatologist, she does a lot of great work on weather, has a lot of great information and extension information out there and presentations about the weather conditions in South Dakota and kind of trends comparing this year to last year. But I just wanted to briefly mention this chart, which shows the departure from normal growing degree days across the US. You can see in South Dakota, we're right around 0. So pretty normal wise when we think about growing degree days for the state. That's what they're showing as of the last week's report. And then in this report, they also include the topsoil and subsoil moisture. So I just want to point out both of those. This is the data for South Dakota. Both are showing over 80% of the acres are at adequate moisture in the state. I'm sure there's some variation across the state and from region to region. So would be curious to hear the audience's thoughts on this and if this is the same as what you're seeing in your part of the state. But as of right now, the data is showing adequate soil moisture. So kind of to wrap this all up and my takeaways from looking at the data, looking at the planting progress, looking at the conditions, although we're slightly behind last year's averages for corn and soybeans in South Dakota, I don't see any cause for concern. The conditions are good and planting progress is quick, especially we saw that corn progress percentage jump up very quickly from last week. So I'm really anxious to see what percentage we'll be at come Monday when the new report is released. And if we look at where South Dakota is compared to most other states, we're seeing these similar trends in other states, although the planting progress and conditions vary from state to state. We see similar kind of trends where we're behind the average planting conditions from previous years and also the planting conditions from last year. As of now, the data for growing degree days and moisture appears normal. We'll see what happens again as the season progresses. And according to the USDA, the acreage report, which was released in March, we're expecting more soybean and less corn acres for this year. That was in the prospective plantings report. So that's definitely going to affect commodity prices, crop insurance, all these details. So definitely planting progress, percentage of acres planted to corn and soybeans, and crop conditions will be important to watch. Especially, I know there's been a lot of talk about commodity markets and outlook, and I know things are not the best right now, but these will all be things to watch as we progress into the growing season. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me or I'll be happy to take questions today too. And wishing all of you in agriculture or involved in agriculture who work with farmers or are a farmer, wishing you a very safe and productive crop year here in South Dakota. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. We appreciate that a bunch.